Welcome to the FasCat Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Overton. Some call me the Big Cat, and today we are talking about breaking through a plateau in your performance. And we're talking with new FasCat Coach Andrew Giniat as our guest and expert on breaking through plateaus. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Frank. Thanks for having me.
You are kindly welcome. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
Everyone, we are going to cover the low-hanging fruit you can implement in your training right away, which are riding more, recovering better, improving your nutrition, thereby improving your body composition. But really, we're going to talk about the fourth item, and that's identifying what's causing the plateau and then smashing that to bits. And that's what we'll spend the majority of this podcast about. But seriously, don't go straight to number 4 and skip numbers 1, 2, and 3. And a great example of that is if you've been training 6 to 8 hours a week, very simply, a highly effective way to improve and break through your plateau is to start riding 8 to 10 hours a week. And I think you'll start to feel your improvement immediately. And then you can even throw in a 12-hour week followed by a rest week. And we think you'll feel like King Kong out there ripping the cranks off. So that low-hanging fruit, numbers 1, 2, and 3, and then move on to number 4. What do you think, Andrew?
Sounds good to me, Frank.
All right. Well, let's do some announcements and reviews. I guess our biggest announcement is that Coach Andrew is in the house with us. He is a new FasCat coach. Welcome. And Andrew comes to us from one of our most favorite, I guess my most favorite riding destination and former state of residence, Asheville, North Carolina. Andrew is a criterium, cyclocross, and road coach, and he races for the CS Velo elite team at the professional level. Important distinction there, on the road, and then also the pony shop for cyclocross. And to commemorate Andrew, really, we have a cyclocross coaching deal going on right now. And it's 6 months of cyclocross coaching with yours truly, Andrew, for the price of 5. You can find it on FasCatCoaching.com. And don't dilly-dally because, first of all, hashtag cross is coming. And second of all, space is limited and this deal expires July 15th. Andrew, can I put you on the spot and maybe can you embellish on the description I just read for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Frank said, I live in an incredibly beautiful place, Asheville, North Carolina, which is some would even call it the Boulder of the East. And I think that name definitely rings true. I've been racing for CS Velo for 3 seasons now. We do all of the biggest races in the U.S. And, we've seen a lot of success both in stage races and criterium. So we are a very versatile team, and I think of myself as a very versatile rider. And then in the every fall, I race cyclocross, mostly here in the U.S., but also in Europe as well. So I'll head over there once our domestic season wraps up. And cyclocross for me is, I don't want to say it's the true passion, but it's, something I get to do sort of for me and sort of on my own. And it's something I really love and am passionate about doing in coaching.
Nice. What's your favorite cross race over there across the pond?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Let's think about that. I think my favorite course, so it's a close tie, and it's funny because these 2 races fall generally, in the same week of racing, and that's Namur is a classic, super technical, super muddy, really epic race. There's cobbles, there's screaming fast descents through the mud. And then the sort of the famed off-camber section that I'm sure you all have seen a lot of photos of. And so it's a race where you're, either, going full gas downhill or you're charging as hard as you can. And that's really fun. But the other one, and this one actually might even be my top choice, is Houston Zolder. So it's at the Houston Zolder car racing track. And so it's actually one of the faster and sort of more road-like cyclocross courses we do over there. But those super fast sections are punctuated by some really, really challenging steep ride-ups and run-ups and descents as well. So it's really a great balance for me coming from a road background, but also being a person who loves to kind of rip the downhills and the technical bits.
Nice. That's awesome. We'll have to record a separate podcast or 2 on cyclocross skills and drills and everything that that you can help the athlete with.
Yeah, that would be awesome. It's definitely something that can't be talked about enough. So I
Right.
think we'll have a lot to cover there.
We recorded a podcast about 3 years ago on cornering alone, and yeah, I love cyclocross because you can, inch wide, mile deep on just cornering, or you could probably do a whole podcast on the race start. And
Right.
yeah, so yeah, we now that you're a part of the team, we'll do so.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to share what I've learned over the years.
Nice, nice. Well, let's keep moving on because we do want to talk about breaking through plateaus for you all. Two more announcements. Number two is I know we have a few multi sport listeners out there, and we're excited to announce that Coach Susie Snyder will be our new multi sport coach. And we'll have her on the pod real soon. Susie's going to lend her expertise to our multi sport training plans and even be available to coach you one on one. And then our last announcement literally just happened today. Congrats to Coach Zach Gregg. He won the Elite National Time Trial Championships today, maybe 6-7 hours ago in Roanoke, Virginia. And big props to his FasCat coached athlete, Patrick Welch, who won the U23 National Time Trial Championships. And I don't know what you guys had for breakfast or dinner, but we definitely want some of that. We're really, really proud of you. There is a picture of you both up on the podium on our Instagram channel. And then also for context, go back and listen to Coach Zach's podcast that we recorded February 3rd this year, where he shares his time trial advice and, even talks about today and what his goals were. And one fun numerical piece of trivia, combined wattage between Patrick and Zach today was 754 watts normalized. Yes.
That's
So
impressive.
it's super impressive. Yeah. Yeah. Congratulations, guys. That's amazing. Not coach and athlete. What a ride.
I would love to see what they could do on a tandem bike.
Oh yeah. Hey, speaking of that, Andrew, have you heard about the Morar? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. Morarity time trial in New Mexico.
No, tell me.
Yes. Okay. So they have a tandem category, and it's one of the flattest, fastest time trials in the country, and that's where people go to set like a non-track time trial record. And my friend John Verheuel, coaching colleague, and then Andy Coggin, they won the tandem national time trial championships. And like combined wattage is like over 600 watts, I think. And yeah, I mean, those guys would like set the land speed record, it seems like.
That's awesome. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be a fun event to do.
Yeah, we can arrange that. That would be fun. Well, let's do our review of the week, and then let's get into breaking through plateauing. Our review of the week comes to us from Thomas, and he gives our Sweet Spot Part 3 plan 5 stars. And he says, "This was the first real cycling plan I've ever invested in, and it was well worth it. The plan was easy to follow and easy to adjust as needed based on life demands, and talk about effective. This is the best I've ever felt and fastest I've ever been riding heading into the heart of the season. Thanks, FasCat." Well, thank you for sweet spotting, Thomas, and good luck with your summer season. And now, Andrew, let's talk about breaking through a plateau in your performance. Let's start with what the heck do we mean when we talk about a plateau?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's an important thing to define for our listeners because it's sort of a nuanced topic. And so I think of mainly two types of plateaus. The first type of plateau would be a stagnation in the power you're seeing. Maybe you cease to see improvements in your FTP or whatever metric it is that is key to your performance. And then the second type of plateau that we can also talk about is a plateau in performance. So what I mean by that is, maybe your training is going well, maybe you're hitting all your targets, but you can't seem to, let's say, get out of the top 20. Maybe you finish 20th place every race. And so that's a slightly different type of plateau. And then the last thing I'll add is that plateaus can happen in different time frames. So we have to be sort of specific about where this plateau is taking place. So for example, you can have a plateau maybe within a training block. So that would be maybe the smallest time frame you could measure this in. So maybe you're doing a 3-week block, and each week the workouts are getting harder, or you're expected to increased time in zone or power for a given effort, and nothing is happening. So that's the smallest time frame. This could also happen, and it's maybe more common for it to happen at, the season level. So, maybe you've done 2 or 3 training blocks and you haven't seen the increase in performance that you, if you're a self-coached athlete, or you and your coach, if you're working with a coach, would expect to see. Now, the last and biggest time frame, and this is probably the most common of all, is to see a multi-season or a multi-year plateau. So
Mm.
maybe you've been training for 2 or 3 years. Maybe you don't work with a coach and you have just been riding. At a certain point, inevitably, you're not going to keep getting better. Or maybe you are working with a coach and you've tried a lot of different things, and for whatever reason, you're not continuing to progress.
That reminds me of the Albert Einstein quote: the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result."
Yeah, and that definitely applies here, Frank. And we'll get into this in a minute when we talk about how we identify and what's happening with that plateau and how we break through it. But if you just keep doing the same thing, you're inevitably going to keep seeing the same results. So
Hmm.
something has to change. And one of the main tenets of training that I think a lot of our listeners will be familiar with is this idea of progressive overload.
Hmm.
And so we're increasing what we're asking our body to do, and that's sort of the essence of how we adapt and how we get better. So if you're not increasing intensity or increasing the amount of intensity you're doing or increasing volume, you're just gonna stay put where you are.
Yeah, I mean, just riding more is an effective way to break through a plateau if you've been doing, the same volume year round. It's as simple as going from, say, 6 hours a week on average up to 8, or even then moving on to 10. And I love what you said about progressive overload, because the body is good at adapting and then keeping things the same. And then you need to you know prog- apply a greater overload than the previous overload, uh,
Mm.
to keep pushing it to adapt and respond.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that and say that I think fundamentally the body wants to be in homeostasis, right?
Hmm.
And in exercises, the body is really good at exercise and it's great at adapting to it, but from an evolutionary perspective, we have to remember that the body is lazy, or at least it wants to conserve resources. So,
Yeah.
whether it's increasing mitochondrial content or capillary density or putting on muscle mass, those are all things that are energetically demanding. And so if your body's going to do that for you, it needs to know that is an important thing to do. It needs to get the stimulus to tell it to do that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the 5 ways that we've outlined in order to break through a plateau, and just go through them one by one, and talk about them. So, Andrew, what's your number one way to begin?
Yeah, so the first step, I think, or maybe the most important point, is to identify what specifically is limiting your performance. So an example of this would be, your FTP is continuing to improve, your workouts are going well, but your results haven't changed. And so in these cases, we need to kind of drill down and determine if maybe it's not your FTP that's holding you back. Maybe you have, an easy time getting to the end of the races, but everybody blows by you. In that case, it, could be your sprint. In other cases, it could be something like you have all these new watts, but you're not using them effectively. Or maybe, so maybe that's like a tactical error, or maybe you're not handling your bike well.
Yep. I think this is step number one, everyone. So you can't change what you don't know. And so you want to figure out where you're coming from. And it could be like what Andrew's talking about. Could be simply your FTP, but there's a lot more other things. It could be your sprint power. It could be that I see this a lot with especially with masters athletes. They're really good with their base and their threshold, but force them to do like anaerobic work, and that's where the chinks in the armor come out. And so it's easily fixed with like a 4 to 6 week block of anaerobic work, and then all of a sudden they got that sixth gear, and that's when they experience an enormous amount of improvement that there was previously holding them back. The other thing is we talk a lot about training and watts and training plan design and all sorts of stuff, but these are skill-based sports. And with the prevalence of Zwift and indoor training nowadays, a lot of athletes are missing out on just general pack riding skills and the ability to draft and negotiate and maneuver around the pack, and know when to counterattack, and know when to conserve. And I have an athlete right now, Gary, in New Jersey. I don't think he'll mind me saying this. His FTP is at an all-time high, and he races really aggressively, and we're working on getting him to actually make lower watts in the first 90% of the race, so that he can make more watts, on the last lap, and then even after the last corner. And that's a skill, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll add kind of my own anecdote for that. I actually have an athlete who was targeting a big kind of endurance mountain bike event that just happened, and we trained up to it. I felt like the training was going really well. We did a little bit of a taper. He went into this event, and didn't get the result that he was hoping for, and so we had a discussion about that, and then I looked at the file, and lo and behold, my athlete broke power records all time from 10
Okay.
minutes to 90 minutes.
Hmm.
And, when I dove in a little deeper, I think what happened was he was feeling so good that day
Hmm.
that he just overplayed his hand,
Hmm.
and so sometimes it's not actually the physical performance that limits the race result, or at least, we have to be careful about how we use that performance on race day.
Totally. Yeah. So experience goes a long way. And sometimes, like in the case of your athlete, it's just, go back and do it again next year and pace more conservatively in the beginning. That's like a big one in the gravel racing scene. Is a lot of athletes, they choose these big giant goal events, but they want to see the results in just 1 year. And what we like to say is, let's take as many gains as we can in year one, but you're going to learn a lot from actually competing in the event. And then let's apply what you learn in year 2 and 3, and really crush your goals. So like Unbound is a great one to because it just happened, but it's so in our minds as a, like, mechanicals, and avoiding those, and nutrition, and the heat wasn't a big deal this year, but pacing, and all the things that you learn that you wouldn't know if you hadn't actually gotten out there and doing it. So I think experience is a big one. So that could be your limiter, and especially in year one. So I like to tell athletes, keep going, keep training, keep racing. Don't put all your eggs in like this season's basket.
Yeah, and maybe the last kind of like big takeaway that I'll add, and we've already sort of touched on this, is talk to your coach. If you're not performing as well as you would like to, either physically or in terms of the
Mhm.
result, say, hey coach, can we look at this race file from a like a B or a C race in advance of your target event. And for us, it's what we do, and it's a thing that we can help break down. And for me, usually I can see kind of a pretty specific reason why the race didn't go the way that you wanted it to, maybe.
Mhm.
So the data sort of speaks to us, and we can kind of hone in on like what it is specifically. And so, you know, yeah, like we discussed earlier, it could be anaerobic capacity, it could be your sprint, could be your FTP. There's a lot of things. So
Totally. Yeah. Isaiah and I recorded a podcast a few years ago about doing a postseason data review and
mm,
really breaking all that up, and identifying strengths and weaknesses, and then working on your weaknesses and maximizing your strengths. Let's move on to number two, Andrew.
yeah, yeah. So number two, and this is I think maybe one of the first things that I look at after kind of understanding what's limiting performance. And this one mostly applies to a limitation or a plateau in like physical performance, and that's taking a break. And this could happen also like on a couple of different time scales. So if you're not resting enough during the week, you're not recovering from your workouts, that's going to be a major reason why you're not continuing to improve. But it could also apply on a larger time scale. So we talked about kind of that, multi-month, season-long plateau, and in those cases, maybe you need like a mid-season break. So maybe you just had your A event, you're going really really well, but in those cases, we've asked a lot of the body. To have those kind of peak performances, we've really, really done a lot of training and hard work to kind of get us there. And I think for a lot of athletes, it's easy to sort of get greedy, I like to say, and want to kind of keep the ball rolling. Maybe
Yeah.
motivation is at an all-time high, whether you won your A event or maybe you didn't get the result you wanted. And in either case, you might want to kind of keep pushing ahead. But that's always going to be a
Mhm.
great time to just take a little bit of time off the bike, reset the body, give your central nervous system a rest, and then you can get back to it.
Mhm.
Now, the third sort of time scale that we talked about is season to season. And as athletes increase in their training age, and maybe they've even applied good progressive overload to their periodization, they're riding more. Maybe they went from a 500-hour year to a 700-hour year. Um,
Mhm.
the time that they take for their off season might actually need to go up as well. So even though maybe those volumes are relative, and you can now handle the 700-hour training season well, I think it's important to have kind of a proportional rest after your season is over. Really shed that fatigue, making sure that we're not coming into our next transition or base period with fatigue from the previous season.
Yeah, yeah. The more you've trained, probably the bigger the break you'll need, and vice versa. If you haven't been training that much, you don't need that big of a off-season break. One of the things we have happened with us a lot, we get a lot of athletes that come to us and hire a coach because they have stagnated and plateaued. And the first thing I look at is their performance manager chart, and oftentimes you'll see an athlete's performance manager chart. It's like a plateau out there, and it's not really moving up or down. It's like, let's say it's like, firmly in the mid 70s, but it never gets above 80, and it never really dips below 70. But it's been like that all year round. And what what Andrew is talking about, and like what we're talking about, we want to see that be either moving up or down, but really never staying the same unless it's intentional for like a interval training block. So like for that athlete, we would rest them and let their CTL just free fall for the break, do a complete reset, and then build back up steadily, progressively, with an eye of eclipsing 75, maybe get up to like 80, 85, but do it in a periodized way. And so you go up to 65, let it go back down to 60 during that rest week, then push on up to like 67, and then go back down to maybe 64 for a little small rest break, and then make a push to like 70, and then come back down to like 66, and then back up to 74. It takes a while. You can't just, this isn't like building a good base and a good training load is not, it's the opposite of cramming for your college exams. It takes 12 to 16 weeks. And yeah, so you got to allow time for that. But I like to see a performance manager chart that's moving up, it's moving down. There's regular rest weeks. There's rest breaks. There's midseason breaks. That's a great way to leverage rest in your favor to keep progressing. And don't, everyone, you mentioned greedy, and everyone gets greedy with their CTL. Don't be greedy with it. Let it go down. That's when you usually see the gains happen.
Yeah, yeah, and you'll definitely see, like a few telltale signs of somebody who's maybe heading towards a plateau, in the PMC. So,
Hmm.
one of the things you mentioned is they get greedy, and maybe you're not taking your rest week seriously. You want that CTL to keep rising. You want to hold on to that. And anytime I've seen an athlete whose performance management chart just kind of just heads up indefinitely,
Yeah.
it never really works out well. We definitely want to see sort of like maybe you rise 20% and then you go down 5%, and you're still heading in the right direction, but you're giving yourself time to adapt and making sure you're
Mhm.
taking care of yourself. And I think that this often applies to, athletes who maybe have done an appropriate off season. They come into the next season of training really excited, really motivated, and they kind of get greedy early on. So I think it
Mhm.
is important to kind of give yourself some headroom and stick to the plan, listen to your coach, and you'll achieve higher highs than if you sort of just steamroll your way to a high CTL.
Totally. One thing that came to mind while you were saying that, Andrew, is a lot of times athletes, they've been training a lot, and this happened to me a couple years ago with the crusher and the tusher, and I just couldn't bounce higher than 110, and I kept trying, and I really just after a couple weeks of trying, I just came to the conclusion that's as high as I need to go and can go physically. And so I took a rest, and then switched over to like threshold training. And yeah, sure enough, I'm like smashing watts. But if you've plateaued out and you just physically can't ride anymore or ride longer just due to literally just fatigue and exhaustion, that's a good sign that you're at your max there, and switch from base to race and begin doing some lower volume, higher
Yeah,
intensity work.
and it's funny because this is going to be sort of the opposite of something we're going to talk about in a minute here. But um, you'll hear stories or see the training plans of some athletes who, maybe they're just training too much. I
Yeah.
mean, there's definitely a level like a CTL that represents an unsustainable workload for you, and a lot of times the way that athlete breaks through is that they take a little break. You hear
Hmm.
these stories about people who they overtrain for months or maybe even years, and then they take a big rest and they come back and they get smart about their periodization and they set all-time records. So as much as we love to see a high CTL, and that's definitely associated with fitness, if your TSB or your training stress balance, I think they call it form now, is just in the toilet, you might not have the freshness or the um, like the neural drive to perform your best.
Yeah, I think we've said it. CTL doesn't win races; watts do. And training load and CTL is important, but then moving on to the developing your power output after that is also equally, if not more important. Should we move on to number three?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's. So number three is a good one, and that's changing the stimulus. So
Hmm.
we've already touched on this a little bit when we talked about Einstein's definition of insanity, which
Yeah.
to refresh our listeners is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so kind of the analogy that I like to give everybody is what got you from a cat 2 to a cat 3, or just from one level of performance to another, is probably not going to be the same thing that gets you from 2 to 1, or from A to B. And
Hmm.
so we have to be, I think, smart about trying different things, analyzing what's worked well for us in the past, maybe what hasn't worked well, and try and come up with a strategy going forward that's going to be different. And so it could be different by being more, it could be different by having more rest, or most specifically to this example, is doing like a different sort of interval. So I'm
Hmm.
sure Frank's got some good stories about a time when an athlete was always doing one thing because that really worked for them, and then eventually it stopped. And like we talked about it before, to kind of speak to our biology, the body is
Hmm.
pretty smart, and the body is really good at sort of getting used to what you throw at it, and sometimes it's gotten so good at a particular thing that you need to change to a new stimulus that it hasn't experienced before, and that will unlock a whole new level of performance.
As you said that, I was thinking about the diabolical workouts that we have in our workout library and in our training plans. And so everyone, if you've been doing VO2s and anaerobic work, we throw the Tabatas at you in order to get you to peak performance, in order to break through that plateau. Similarly, we have some pretty diabolical threshold crisscrosses where you're riding threshold, and then we ask you to do some zone 6 work on top of that threshold, and then go back to threshold. So that's really hard. It's not like you're trying to like come up with the most difficult workouts there are. You're just trying to break through that plateau so your body just doesn't really just level off there. But we do reserve those for when we're trying to get the athlete to be in their best shape.
Yeah, and another thing that I'll sort of mention here, and this is just sort of sounding the horn that I already sound, but athletes will have favorite workouts, and
Mhm.
they'll have workouts that historically have worked really really well for them. So if we think about just like a classic workout, like a 3x20, maybe last year you did your 3x20s at 300 watts, in your sweet spot zone. This year, maybe your FTP has gone up and you're doing your sweet spot at 320, but you're still doing 3x20. And so sometimes we need to come up with ways that we can we can continue to challenge you. The point here, I guess, is that doing a workout at a higher absolute intensity, but the same relative intensity, isn't necessarily going to push you through to the next level. And so that's why, Frank and, other really smart coaches out there have come up with these, as he calls them, diabolical workouts. So,
Mhm.
there are workouts that you and pros are both doing, and they're the same. But I think more likely than not, as people increase in training year and they need to keep pushing to get more performance, the workouts do have to get harder, and not just, in absolute terms.
Yeah, I mean, you can do all the VO2s in the world, but if you're going to get to a point where they just have a point of diminishing returns, and you'll just level off, and you'll get all the pain from the VO2s and no more of the gain. I suppose. So then that's what we're talking about. Then you need to introduce a new level of stimulus on top of that, and that's the diabolical workouts. Going back to your point about changing the stimulus from like cat 3 to cat 2 and cat 2 to cat 1, you, you, I'm probably dating myself here. Like 20 years ago, it was pretty much, it was like the Eddie B book of riding volume. Like, you need to do 10,000 miles a year to be a cat 2, and you need to do like 15,000 miles a year to become a cat 1. And everyone was out there doing that because that was that was just what it was accepted to get up to those levels. It was totally the rod more uh, way to break through the plateau. And this is way before power meters and sports science and coaching and all that came along, and it kind of changed the game. Now we just have new ways of expressing that, and figuring out new ways to break through plateaus, hopefully faster and more effective.
Yeah, yeah. And one other kind of idea that I would kind of use to sort of illustrate this is, more is not always more. So, maybe you do want to continue to do 3x20s, just as an example, but maybe you do it at the end of your 2 hour ride or the end of your 3 hour ride.
Hmm.
Because something that's important to remember, I think, for all of our listeners, is that we're training for events, right? And as you get better, at least in the road racing world, the demands of those events typically increases. And so, we need to train specifically for that. So, if you're a pro level road racer or a Cat 1 road racer in the US, you might still need to be able to do the power that you could do fresh after 3,000 or 4,000 kilojoules. So,
Hmm.
training to those specific demands, can help you break through these plateaus, and sometimes it's not even your power specifically. Sometimes it's something like fatigue resistance, which is
Yep.
an example of what I was talking about there.
Yeah.
So you do really need, and I know we're kind of driving this one hard, but you need to figure out what specifically the limiter is, and
Yeah.
sometimes more power is not the answer.
Yeah, just this morning in our forum.fastcatcoaching.com, John Livingood was asking about a long ride that he did, and he was really tired after having belted out 3,000 to 4,000 kilojoules. At the beginning of the ride, you can do like 300, 350 watts, no problem. But then after 3,000, 4,000 kilojoules, he is unable to do that. He's tired. And that's what Andrew is talking about there with fatigue resistance. And so that may be your limiter. And Coach Jake piped up and said, we have workouts where we'll have you do one sweet spot interval at the beginning, and then you go ride for 3,000 kilojoules, and then you try to do the same wattage sweet spot interval at the same like heart rate and RPE afterwards. And that, when you can start doing that, that is what we call addressing your fatigue resistance, and that may be your limitation. Like for me, example, like all the long hard rides I've done, like the O route in Asheville, man, I'm like can barely do like 200 watts on the last climb because you're so tired. And that's like a big area of opportunity for folks. As a side note, really to beat this one to death here, what's like your best recommendation to develop fatigue resistance?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is going to kind of dovetail us into the next one,
Mhm,
which is the volume that you're riding. I think that is going to play a huge role in your fatigue resistance. So, as you go through your ride, things are happening in the body. Maybe you're cycling through, larger and larger motor units, recruiting bigger and bigger muscle fibers. And unless you've trained those larger muscle fibers, those, kind of higher threshold motor units, those fibers are going to be like extremely glycolytic. And so we need to kind of, you know, get deep into those rides, and go into that kind of hard place to make those fibers more oxidative. And so that's like kind of like a scientific way of sort of thinking about training our fatigue resistance there.
mhm,
But all else equal, I would say that would be the first place to start is by just going out there and racking up some kilojoules. Really pushing the body to sort of the point of fatigue.
mhm,
And it doesn't have to be grueling. We're going to do this progressively. So, maybe if you're accustomed to only riding 2,000 kilojoules, and maybe a 3 or 4 hour ride, we can either increase the volume and therefore increase the workload that you're asking your body to do, or we can be creative if maybe you're limited on time, and we can kind of layer in intensity all throughout that ride. So that might
mhm,
be a sprint every 10 minutes or some threshold every 5 or 10 minutes. Um,
mhm.
Things like that are gonna increase the total workload without increasing the ride time if you're limited.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
maybe the answer is both.
Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of, ways to go about it. Like, you can give an athlete like one 10-minute threshold interval to perform each hour for the first 4 hours, and then ask them to do as hard as they can in the fifth hour. I mean, you can get the creativity is endless. And, you could have them do, a couple of anaerobic 1 minuters each hour to really fatigue those muscle fibers, and then ask them to go all out after. You can maybe like 3 hours is the limit. Like when we recorded a podcast with Patrick Warner and Ben Sharp, everyone that's Pat, it was, won the Masters Nationals time trial. Actually, an update on that. Pat just set the Masters World hour record like last
Whoa.
week. He did like 51 kilometers. He literally did a kilometer for every age, every year he's lived on this earth, like 50, oh, yeah, 51 kilometers. But anyway, what Ben Sharp was telling us about is how he had Pat go out and do this like kitchen sink workout where it was like, two VO2 max intervals after a 30-minute warm up, then like some zone two for like 30 minutes, and then like, a couple of sets of 3 by 1 minuters, then a bunch of sweet spot, and then some like race winning moves in the third hour of the workout. And that they were simulating like the Masters Road National Championship course, and they called it the kitchen sink. And it's totally diabolical. They only do it when they're getting into the final weeks leading into the event, but that's like a great way of thinking about you can increase the load in a short period of time. Like the other thing, like the classic Alpe d'Huez workout, the tour stage, go ride 3,000 kilojoules and then go do a 20-minute climb as hard as you can. And,
It's
compare
tough.
that power. Yeah, it's really tough. You have to really be on your nutrition and your hydration. And, do you ride those 3,000 kilojoules as easy as possible? But then it's going to take you 10 hours to rack up 3,000 kilojoules, or you've got to ride them like a normal Peloton. Or like what happens to guys, this is a good one, that goes down to the Tour of the Gila, the Mogollon stage. Everyone looks at it and it's like, okay, we're going to ride flat for 4 hours and then drill it for 2 hours. But when you do like the pro race, you're not riding in zone two. You're like, you could be echeloned out. You could be really, going hard for those 4.5 hours. And when you get to the bottom of the climb, you're just bleh. And, or maybe it's just from the volume, or maybe you didn't eat or drink enough, or all the above. But yeah, well, now we're
Well,
way off topic here.
yeah. Well, the last thing I'll say on that is I did do Mogion this year. Actually, our team
Nice.
actually we won yellow at Tour of the Gila this year, so that was
Yeah,
that
correct.
was a super exciting achievement. But yeah, I think another important thing about doing those long rides and doing intensity in those long rides is you really need to train yourself to fuel well to be able to
Mhm.
execute those.
Mhm.
And because those resemble your races, that's a great opportunity to practice. And I'll
Mhm.
tell our listeners out there that, you know, you go on and do a 4 hour endurance ride, it's pretty easy to stay on top of your nutrition.
Mhm.
Every 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, you have, your 30 grams of carbohydrate or whatever it is that you've worked out. But when you're layering in intensity in there, it becomes pretty tricky.
Mhm.
And it becomes even more critical that you're staying on top of your fueling. And so I think practicing that is
Yep.
going to increase your fatigue resistance, practically speaking.
I think I have a lot of, so we talk about gravel simulation rides, and we have athletes do 3 gravel simulation rides. So the first one is like 5 hours, about 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks prior to competition. And then 2 weeks later, have them do the similar ride and just notice the improvement they got from that fatigue resistance. And and then they do the final prep ride, and that's where they put everything they learned from nutrition and hydration and pacing, plus the physiological adaptations. And we kind of do that to let them see and build confidence from that improve fatigue resistance. But you got to get out there and put in the miles. I don't think there's any other way around it. Yeah, that's maybe the old school in me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that definitely gets us to our fourth point,
Uh
which
huh.
is increasing volume. And if you've determined with your coach that it is a physical limiter that you're experiencing, and that's maybe what's causing your plateau. Um, Increasing volume is going to be one of the easiest ways to break through that. So if you're doing a good job of resting, you've sort of identified that you are in a plateau, and you sort of know what's going on there. Like Frank said earlier, if you've been riding 6 to 8 hours a week, maybe you bump that up to 10 hours a week. And that
Mhm.
doesn't sound like a lot. It's, maybe you add 30 minutes on each ride 3 or 4 times a week.
Mhm.
Maybe it's riding a little longer on the weekends when you have some more time. I think there's different ways to skin the cat. But we can help you, or your coach can help you kind of strategize on ways to kind of include that smartly. And that is almost one of the most surefire ways to break right through a plateau.
Yeah.
And if you're really time crunched and you say like, hey, 6 hours is absolutely max. One
Mhm.
thing I've kind of recommended to some of my athletes is, maybe you can find a long weekend or a holiday where you can kind of fit in a big long ride or just a little bit of extra volume. Maybe you can come up with some times of the year where work is a little bit slower, and if you know that and you plan that in, you can kind of bump up the volume there. Ideally, you're doing it over the course of a block progressively. But if the only way to do it is in one dose, like on your spring break or summer break, I think that
Yeah.
can work well too.
Take a day off work. I mean, we have a holiday this Monday, July 4th, coming up. 3-day riding weekend. You know, if you're able to. So theoretically, I'm a big fan of having athletes do the 5-4-3, 5 hours first day, 4 hours the next day, 3 hours the third day, and then the way that it works with fatigue resistance is the fatigue dependent training plan design. So ride like tons of sweet spot and just get a really large TSS like that first set day, Saturday, like a 300, 350 TSS. And then you're going to be a little bit tired on Sunday, probably a lot tired, but this is your training block. So dig in. This is how you work on fatigue resistance. You train when you're tired. And then don't expect to be able to ride as well or make as many watts, but still get out there and ride for 4 hours more than zone two, but you may not be able to do as much sweet spot. And then by the time you get to 4th of July, just kind of, choose an easier route. Like, you know, don't try to choose the most challenging terrain possible and just like tap out like 3 hours of zone two. That's like, what is that? 5, 9, that's 12 hours of training right there in 3 days. That you take Tuesday, Wednesday off, I bet you'll feel like smashing your group route on Thursday. So,
Yeah, I think so. And it's, when we're talking about adding volume here, for you, everybody's different and every training plan is different. It could mean, doing more intervals, but what it most likely means is doing more endurance riding.
mhm.
And people on the internet and kind of people in the sports science world have talked a lot about this idea of polarized training recently. And,
Mhm.
doing this 80-20 thing. But I think what all of sort of, the initiated kind of have concluded from that now is not that you have to polarize your training or that you should polarize your training, but that doing an endurance volume, like a high endurance volume, is important for performance.
Mhm.
And something that a lot of people talk about on that is autonomic nervous system stress. So, all stress is not created equally. And so, if you do, 200 TSS of intervals or you do 200 TSS of endurance riding, those aren't exactly the same. And so, we can get away with adding volume in, adding more endurance training,
Mhm.
without necessarily, putting ourselves, in a huge hole. So, we
Mhm.
still do have to kind of increase that gradually and, apply that to our training smartly. But it's I think more obvious now than ever that having a good volume of endurance riding is really important for performance.
Amen. Yeah. But critical, actually. Yeah. I mean, that's why it's the lowest hanging fruit. Just increase the amount of endurance training on, to whatever, all the intensity you've been doing. It's like poof, you're going to notice an improvement. We see this time and time again. Athletes come out of the basement in the spring and they go from riding the trainer to doing longer rides outside and they get amazingly faster. It's actually super fun to see and watch. And it happens in a manner of like 3 to 4 weeks, with just by riding more. So if you haven't been riding enough for whatever reason, let that be a nugget of optimistic opportunity for you to get out there and ride more this 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, and it's fun too. I mean, unless you're overpacing your endurance rides, you're riding them too hard, maybe because you're time crunched. You know, talk to your coach about like what the optimal pacing is for those endurance rides. It might mean that you need to ride at low endurance or right in the middle of your zone. But those rides should be fun, and I
Mhm.
think they're really rewarding and they can be social and enjoy everybody.
Yeah, yeah, the training doesn't have to be mind numbing by yourself looking at your power meter. Get out there and the more fun you have, generally the more productive it's going to be. Let's move on to the fifth and final way to break through a plateau, and I'll let you do the honors, Andrew.
Thank you. Yeah. So, this applies to people who I think are doing all these other elements of training well. They're at the maybe like the maximum sustainable volume that they can do. They're executing their intervals well. But these things are just as important and they're really easy to do. So, tip number one on this list is sleep more.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody once said like, "Hey, if there was a thing out there that you could do for 30 minutes or 1 hours a day, it'd be totally free and it would increase your performance 20%. Would you do it?" And you know what that thing is? It's sleep. It's like it's
Yep.
huge. It's gonna boost your testosterone. It's gonna increase growth hormone. Like there's so
Yep.
many amazing things that happen with sleep. And if you've already done some of these other steps, like maybe you're trying different intervals, maybe you're progressing your intervals or doing more volume. Sleep has to be proportional to that. And I think it's the easiest thing to do. It does require some planning, and I think you have to be smart about managing your time. But I think almost everyone out there can get a little bit more sleep. And talk about fun. I mean, who
So
doesn't love
much
sleep?
fun.
Um, the
Yeah.
second thing on that list that's very similar actually is just reducing life stress and managing your time well. So for instance, if you do your rides first thing in the morning and the next thing on your schedule is to go straight to work and you can wake up maybe let's say 15 minutes earlier so that you can shower and have like a post ride meal afterwards.
Hmm.
That's going to have like a huge multiplier effect where you're going to recover better, you're going to be less stressed. You can kind of come down from maybe the fight or flight mode that you're in during that workout to a rest and digest mode.
Hmm.
And you're going to feel way better. And not only are you going to be happier, but you're probably going to perform better. And then the last thing is look at your nutrition. So some of us, don't have a lot of weight to lose, but maybe our diet quality isn't that high.
Mhm.
So, simply by including more nutritious foods, increasing nutritional density is how I like to talk about it, can be a
Mhm.
huge thing. So, um, you know, we can help set you up with a nutritionist if you want to have a look at your diet. It's pretty simple to track your diet for a couple of days and see what the macros are. Maybe you're not getting enough carbohydrates. Maybe you're not getting enough protein. These are all things that are really easy to correct. Everybody loves eating, and they're going to create some pretty huge breakthroughs if you're deficient in one or the other.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then of course, like if you have few lbs to lose, maybe implementing a smart way to um, improve your body composition could be a good thing. Um, watts per kilo are a very real thing. Um, and so that's also a thing that's definitely low hanging fruit, and has nothing to do with increasing your watts or doing more training.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned looking at your macros and your micronutrients. So everyone out there, as you know, Dr. Lauren has a nutritional consult. She will have you record your what you eat for 3 4 days in an app called Chronometer, and then she'll analyze your nutritional data and then let you know what she thinks about it. And a lot of times, she will report back like, this athlete just wasn't eating enough carbohydrate. And that's really common actually because everyone's trying to lose weight and they do that by cutting carbs. Or other times, maybe not having enough protein. Or where our big thing for losing weight and also fueling your rides is eat more vegetables. And there's that when we talk about nutritionally dense food, those are oftentimes vegetables will help you feel full and help you lose weight with all the fiber and that satiety of feeling full. That we're not saying like skip carbohydrate altogether or anything like that. You want to snack right. You want to still consume carbohydrate, healthy, lean cuts of protein. Take a look at our winning in the kitchen meal plans. We have an introductory one, and then we have a weight loss one that's based on your gender, your activity level, and your current body weight. And it's scientifically designed. We give you all the recipes with the exact amounts that factor in the losing weight by calories, but with a small reduction that you won't really notice that much energy decrease for your workouts. But yeah, nutrition is huge. So that's how I literally, Andrew, upgraded from like cat 2 to cat 1. I lost like 10, 15 pounds. It was poof. And I don't think, I mean, I trained hard that winter, but my threshold might have went up a little bit, but it was weight that was the big thing. I was climbing way, way faster.
Well, and, it doesn't even necessarily have to be that much, and everybody
Yeah.
has a different amount to lose. And that's, I think the biggest thing there is that it's important to, talk to a nutritionist, get your body composition tested and figure out exactly, what that number is. So maybe you only need to lose 2 pounds. I mean, that could be pretty easy. And that could just be some, like Frank said, some really minor changes that you almost wouldn't even notice in your diet, and your performance is going to go way up. So yeah, it's, it's,
Yeah,
it's
and
easy enough.
getting yeah, I mean, it's just winning at the grocery store, doing, getting that grocery list and bringing it home, cooking your own food. Oftentimes for us older athletes, it means eating out at restaurants less. Really, just get into your nutrition, like the recipes and shopping and cooking for yourself, and that'll happen. You were mentioning sleep and stress, and even on like last week's podcast, we talked a lot about wearables and HRV and get yourself a wearable. Whoop, Aura, wonderful. This is a Whoop, but nowadays Apple Watch has sleep data on OS 9. I think they're even Apple Health will get you started on HRV. Garmin is now getting into sleep and HRV, and use those devices to become more in tune with what is more sleep. Like that's one revelation I had from wearing a Whoop. I thought I was getting 8 hours of sleep each night, but it was like, well, you were in bed 8 hours a night, but you were awake for an hour. And So I was actually only getting 7 hours of sleep because you're like tossing and turning and all
Mhm.
that. So the way you have to, in order to manage it, you have to first measure it. So then I started going to bed earlier, and I was in bed for 9 hours. Then I went up to 8 hours. That's just an example. But a lot of times, you know, I'll tell athletes if they've been averaging 6.5 hours of sleep on average, for the week or the month, it's like, let me challenge you to get 7 hours of sleep, and let's see if you can bump your hours average up to 7 hours this week, and see if you don't feel a difference. And with regards to the stress, that's HRV, heart rate variability. See if you can work on ways to reduce stress, like Andrew was saying, yoga, meditation, or just not choosing to stress out. There's we could do a whole nother podcast on that. In fact, we have. If you want to go back and listen to some of the podcasts we did about HRV and with Dr. Lauren, but yeah, so if you're maybe like stagnating on your recovery and you think you've identified that per number one, really start getting into that. It's your lifestyle, and it's more than the time you spend just on the bike. It's the whole 24 hours of the day, and a wearable or paying attention to your sleep and your stress can help you tackle that and possibly break through.
Yeah, and it's gonna feel good. It's gonna benefit other areas of your life, and like Frank said, the wearables are super powerful these days, and they
Mhm.
allow us to measure, whether or not there was a reduction in stress and whether or not sleep quality has gone up, and they really help us keep accountable to, I think, good habits. Things like improving your sleep hygiene and just staying generally relaxed. That stuff will show up in the Whoop data, and it's going to help keep you on track. So I'm a huge fan of that. I definitely use it for myself and for all of my athletes who have it, and those who don't, I encourage them to give it a shot. So I'm on
Yeah.
board with that message.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lifestyle. It's not necessarily just the bike ride. Well, I think we've just about covered everything, Andrew. Any overarching words of wisdom to wrap this podcast up?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'll just continue to drive home, and I mentioned it a few times here, is talk to your coach. See where you need to improve and how you can make those improvements. And
Hmm.
um, I think it's smart to not take on too many things at once. And if you can kind of cover the low hanging fruit first,
Uh-huh.
make sure that you're kind of hitting your targets and doing the right things, then everything will fall into place. So it doesn't have to be hard, and yeah, I think it can be pretty easy.
One question we as coaches love to hear is our athletes saying, "Coach, what can we do to get faster? What do we do?" Ask your coach what you can do to break through the plateau. That's what we live and breathe for. And then give us like 10 minutes to just rattle off ideas and maybe suggestions for you. And that's the benefit of having a coach. That's the benefit from listening to this podcast. And if you have any questions about breaking through your unique plateau, leave us questions in our private Facebook group, or go to our coaching forum.fastcatcoaching.com, or you can hit us up in the chat at fastcatcoaching.com. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here. It was really a pleasure having you for the first time. Yeah, I'm psyched to do more podcasts with you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for hearing me out and having the conversation.
Absolutely. Everyone, don't forget to use 25 Podcast to receive 25% off your first FastCat training plan. All of our training plans are backed by our 100% money back guarantee, and we have close to 1,000 5-star reviews if you want to check them out on our reviews. But we think you've got nothing to lose because you're going to get a lot faster. And with that, everyone, will bid you adieu until next week. Have a great week of training, and remember to work hard, ride fast, have fun, and as always, FTFP.